Well, hey everyone, Will Norton here. I oversee our product marketing here at CloudBolt, and I'm joined with Kyle Campos, who is our Chief Technology and Product Officer. And we're actually coming in from Las Vegas this week, out here with CloudBolt, attending AWS's annual reInvent conference, and obviously participate every year in the keynotes and the sessions, and take part in the community, taking a lot of insights and learn. As AWS obviously brings forth a ton of stuff and releases and walks us through what's to come and future roadmap and talks about their strategy and vision. But we also use this time every year to meet up with our partners, our customers, and our key prospects, and find some moments to just have conversations with the community. It's a great time. I mean, Kyle, obviously we're rounding the corner, closing out 2023, moving into December in 2024, and we had a lot of conversations this week. I'd like to just start by asking, what are some of the key themes that you're hearing wrapping up 2023, and where are people's heads at for 2024?
So we've had a lot of conversations across a pretty wide spectrum of customers and partners, varying maturity levels and practices, everywhere from, looking to get pretty hyper advanced in extending their current, FinOps or orchestration capabilities, all the way to others that are just launching a FinOps, practice and trying to get out of the gates. So it's been good to kind of get a sampling across all of those personas, and certainly in a context like reInvent, it's great because it's inspiring a lot of creative thought in people's, minds, spurring a lot, capturing imagination around what's the art of the possible. Key themes, there continues to be this sort of uncomfortable tension between, both what they think FinOps should be returning back into the organization from a value perspective, versus, what they see today and the roadblocks to getting it, and so some of that I think has a lot to do with sometimes just organizational enterprise dysfunction, but also just some practicalities of where responsibilities set across from FinOps to orchestration teams. We talked to several people who are like, we're just launching a FinOps practice. My team's currently incubating it, but I know they're building a team over here, and we're going to have to do some handoff at some point, and we really love, this product. I don't know what they think yet, because we're going to have to talk to them. So you start to pick up on all these areas of friction and tension where those activities are just too siloed, right? And everybody is looking for a way to bring in a common experience between those two personas so that they can get on to the higher value stuff, the higher order stuff, instead of, wrestling around in the mud with the basics, which we heard a lot of as well. Yeah. A lot of challenges just getting going. We had some conversations with things, everything from tagging to to allocation and all those types of things that they seem like basics because we've been talking about them for a long time, and the capabilities existed, but it is still a difficult landscape for people to navigate. And I think from a product perspective for us, I think that's the area we really want to press into is that user experience, lowering that friction, which kind of goes into the another couple themes I think we heard around cross-cloud optimization opportunities, and a high level of interest there around, it's not just about what maybe AWS or any of the cloud service providers are doing for optimizing your own cost workloads that are running inside of that cloud provider, but what about across cloud providers? What about my private cloud context? A lot of cloud migration strategies hinge on, we talked to one customer saying look, there's a lot of assumptions baked into it.
Sure.
For us from the budget impact perspective, if we move a workload from our private cloud to the public cloud, and we don't know how to analyze that with any data,
Right.
uh,
Pre-migration.
pre-migration or post, right? Like then how do we validate those assumptions?
Sure.
For MSPs and such that are trying to help other customers navigate that, there's a lot of opportunity there for us to provide that type of cross cloud clarity and optimization recommendations, et cetera. So that was a big theme. And I think the third big one, which was very in line with all the announcements here at AWS, was what's the role of AI/ML in FinOps space? Yeah, and which is good because there's a lot of excitement there, and I think there's a lot of promise in our space, and obviously it's something we're investing a lot of time, energy, and product focus behind. And I think this coming year will be a pretty big year in that space.
It does seem. I look back at the year and we think about the conversation that was happening even last year at AWS in November, rounding out into even Q1. We started kind of collect insights. We had our CII where we did obviously the research with Wakefield, and I think a lot of 2023 was, okay, we're going to stand up our FinOps practice. We're going to, for a lot of companies at least, we're going to really invest into this, focus on efficiency, focus on optimization, focus on our maturity and try to scale this out. And it does feel in the conversation that we're having that that's happened. Right? And now, as we think through the conversations we had this week, it almost seems like the next step is how do we scope up? How do we advance? How do we move faster? It's not necessarily, we want to hire a bigger team. I think those conversations were happening last year, although I'm sure plenty are investing. But it's more, okay, now we've got kind of the grounding under our feet. How do we start to use technology to move it faster? And go beyond just the public cloud? Because the valuable insights and the ways of thinking in the world of FinOps are starting to knock on a lot of doors outside of the public cloud, I would say. And like you said, with AWS and a ton of conversation about new technology, you're always kind of thinking forward. It does seem, and I'd love your thoughts on this, like when we think about things like AI/ML, what we heard consistently was we need that to lower the barrier of entry for the rest of the organization. It's a common challenge. We need AI to make it FinOps more accessible beyond the data experts, beyond the cloud cost experts. Any thoughts or insights from? I mean, we heard a lot of that.
Because I was glad to hear a few of our customers share, a pretty high frustration level around that. One of our customers was kind of deriding a competitor around the configuration costs. They're like, you want me to do this how many times for all of these accounts, right? And so even just the manual effort involved in configuring and running FinOps programs is already a pretty high level. And then to your point on complexity, I think those are the sort of linearly tracking lines that are kind of death rattles for any industry, which is the more advanced you get, the more complicated you get, the more exclusive your personas get, right? It's like, really narrowing. Like, now, you have to have some sort of FinOps Nobel Prize to be able to navigate, how to get any value out of it. And so I think that's where, I want us to really make sure we invert that whole trajectory, right? And I think conversational AI has done a lot in a very short time span to help with, I think, healthy expectations there, which is like, I can accomplish a lot of seemingly magical things with very simple interface that I don't need to know really anything about. Like, I'm a terrible artist, but I can get into a conversational AI and create exactly what's in my head, right? Or I can draw architectures on a whiteboard, and all of a sudden that can get represented in concrete ways. And so I think, that space has done wonderfully to capture imaginations and get thoughts spinning about what the art of the possible is. But I think even more importantly, what, like the progress of like OpenAI has had an impact on the industry is that it's yet again, and in our industry, we always relearn the same lessons over and over again, but it yet again proves that the products and applications that meet the users with the lowest amount of friction and are fastest to return value to them will win the space. I know a lot of the conversations are around which models and all these types of things, but at the end of the day, none of that is going to matter. It's going to be where the compelling user value exists with the simplest, lowest barrier to entry exists. And so I think there's massive opportunity in our space for improvement there.
I'm glad you're talking about it, because it does seem like the through line for the AI, especially when it comes to FinOps, is okay, AI is here, but it needs to be here. Meaning it needs to be in the world of copy.
Yeah, applied to our domain.
Massive amounts of data, so much telemetry, and to your point, we've talked about this a lot this week, so much advancement in features and functionalities in these technologies in the FinOps space have come so far, but if it's always manual to get value out of that, right?
Yeah.
It's always going to be a problem. So we've elevated what the FinOps technology can do.
Yeah.
Now we need to make it more accessible and easier.
Yep.
We spoke at FinOps X, which maybe feels like a week ago, but it's been half a year.
Yeah.
And we had a conversation about automation, orchestration, and how that was kind of coming up everywhere. Right? How do we start to really get more proactive, less reactive in cost? Right? We've got the reporting, we've got the optimization, and we definitely can do cleanup. But to quote you, the problem once you've introduced a problem or something that's over provisioned or that's waste, the lead time to action for complex organizations can take a long time, right? And so how do we get better about applying automation, orchestration, both proactively and reactively? That conversation has not calmed down. All this week. I just wonder if you had any thoughts or wanted to talk through any of that.
You're 100% right. It hasn't calmed down. If anything, it's getting more and more common, and I think it makes sense, because as people are rolling out these products, you don't really know you have that problem until you start surfacing. Right. You're like, oh, now I know what to do, and then the second stage problem is like, oh man, it's really hard. We got to do it. Yeah, exactly. And then maybe the first wave there was a bunch of manual effort and the sort of cyclical, like we rounded everybody up, we were on the same page, we did it, and then you turn around and you're like, now we got to do that again. Now we got to do it again, right? And so I think it's only kind of, there's a lot of pent up angst and frustration there. And this is another, in this case, there is little common ground besides the fact that we're talking about cloud infrastructure between a FinOps user experience and cloud operators user experience around how change is implemented, deployed, validated, how risk is assessed, et cetera. There's very little of that presently in our industry is translated into the FinOps user experience or into that persona where they know how to navigate it. So the industry is still largely talking about motivation in this regards, like how do we motivate engineering? And I think the challenge for us is to turn that conversation into how do we better facilitate that instead of motivate, because everybody wants to do the right thing. Right. Everybody wants to do the right thing.
Time and attention and focus and priority problem across the board. The incentive structures and just the daily grind of being in whatever role you're in. In a way. I feel like we all do that, right?
And there are so many factors there around, perceived ROI versus real ROI, things like that I think, add true complexity to that conversation. And I think, challenge accepted from, the customers that came to us and partners that came to us to say, like, you got to create a unified space and experience where you can, if we can take lead time to action for an enterprise from 3 months to 3 weeks to 3 days
Right.
to 3 hours, right? Like then you start getting, the value starts piling very quickly. And you mentioned the proactive side, which I'm glad you mentioned that. I think, to be quite honest, there's an awkward tension there with the proactive side. Get a lot of head nods and like appreciation from an engineering context to say like absolutely, like I want insight from a PR to our planning to all of that. Like I want that's where I want engagement with FinOps concerns. I don't want it late. I want to, and then of course from a finance perspective, they want cost avoidance, right? But the awkward point is, do you really? Because it's very hard to provide organizational value for cost avoidance. It is just much easier to be the hero fighting fires than it is to be the sort of forest management ahead of the fire setting, right? And I think still this is an open-ended problem in our industry. Fortunately, it's kind of in most cases 2 steps away. It's because it's like very few people are doing a lot of proactive things to do cost avoidance. But we were having a conversation right behind us with a partner that was asking us about things on our table for improving proactive side, which we have quite a bit.
Sure.
But I just laid out there that use case, which was, so you have a customer who you go in and help drive $1 million of cost to $50,000 of cost. That's easy to celebrate. You have a parade for that, right? Fantastic. But what are you going to do when that group says, hey, we made a change that keeps our spend level at 50,000, but if I hadn't made that change, it would have gone to $1 million.
Away from the cost.
Yeah, like what are you going to do in that case? And they all admitted, right? They're like,
There's no parade.
we would have just shrugged our shoulders and like,
no parade.
right? And that's, I mean, that's that's an incentive problem.
Right.
And it's a very, very real one because those impact budgets, right?
Sure.
So, if you can think of in enterprises, it's handled in varying ways, but if you roll over at a certain waste level, if you're at a $50 million budget line, there's like, that's going to carry over. But if the teams did really well and did a bunch of optimization and cost avoidance, they're down at 10 million, right? Like, so like we're doing the right thing and getting penalized, right? So I think it is a complicated ground, and I think we can help that, and we need to help that because you don't want misaligned incentives. You want the right thing to get rewarded, and not just this sort of gamesmanship around.
Fixed a problem introduced. I would say that your point earlier around, people want to do the right thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's not even a problem of competing priorities, and maybe it is in a lot of cases, but it's just a lot of priorities that engineering and DevOps teams, they have in front of them, right?
Yeah.
So many stakeholders, so many things that need to be thought through. And really, in my opinion, I know we've talked about this, it is the FinOps team's role to get the right insights to those teams early as a part of their process and build it into how they create solutions for the organization. Yeah. And right now that's a gap. And so I think that's, a lot of what we talked about today was it's not ruling with the stick, right? And it's not over engineering your governance and locking things all the way down because there's been a bad reaction to that from an agility and a transformation perspective. It's being a proactive partner with those teams. And I think technologies could do better facilitating that, to your point. Which brings me to kind of the last thing that I think we're already kind of talking about here, which is, how do you go beyond what the FinOps domain, let's just call it, and community has created from an insights perspective or a focus perspective, or the metrics and the goals and the KPIs that have been introduced from a finance perspective. How do you go beyond that and start to get business level priorities and data and all of those things baked into the FinOps process? How do you start to expose those things so that you can align FinOps programs with the different focuses of every team and every persona group and every stakeholder?
Yeah.
That did come up a lot this week, where it feels like you talk about FinOps really being this play on words between finance and DevOps, and it really has felt just finance for a long time in the data.
I think so. Yeah.
And so, a couple conversations we had this week, but where's your head on kind of bringing in or needing into the technology business level data? I feel like that's coming up a lot. Custom data, right?
For sure. So there's a couple of ways we talked about that with customers and partners here. One is and this has been obviously somewhat of a white whale for a lot of the FinOps community for a while, which is how you incorporate unit cost into, which is obviously certainly for most businesses, but certainly SaaS businesses, the live or die metric, right? Several years of my leadership life were dragged around by the throat by getting unit cost clarity and improvement year over year, and a lot of incentive structures around that, right? So that is one that I would say in our space is yet to be solved well,
Right.
And I would go so far as to say it's being solved the exact wrong way, which is pushing all the pain on users and FinOps practitioners to essentially do their own homework and bring to platforms the answer. Then they just use platforms as kind of a tracking tool. And I think that's a proven failure pattern. So I think a little bit of a tease there. We have some different thoughts about how to solve that problem, and I think that's going to be a major one. And then from a organizational side, I think the benchmarking, scorecarding of some of the key practices, but behaviors that are entwined in that. We talked about
just cost reduction.
Not just like CPU consumption levels and all those types of things. Which, by the way, I think the FinOps community, the KPIs list that they sent out is a really good thing.
6 months.
Is really helpful. But I think kind of layering on top of that, like you mentioned, kind of going elevations higher that help businesses assess the return on value, and then is that return what we should expect, or should we be doing a lot better in that regard? And right now it's very difficult to assess that because everybody assesses it a very different way. I think the advanced level conversation that very, very few are having, and I'm so eager to solve these more fundamental problems so that we can get on to it. We had this conversation with one customer. It was great to have it, which was, okay, let's think beyond this. The bigger problem that we have to solve is, how do you do all this optimization, et cetera, and innovate and experiment in such a way that your innovation velocity is also keeping up pace. Right. And right now, that's kind of two opposing forces, right? Because first reaction is to constrain the experimental behaviors, the sort of R&D, constrain it in any number of ways, any number of practices, but it is a constraint, right? And governance models tend to, you could pick layers of constraints, but they are all constraints, right? And for organizations, and I think now we're entering in a new wave of sort of innovation velocity, certainly in the AI space, right? And so now I just had this conversation over lunch, which was, okay, But now we know we're getting into a space we're going to have to be spending a lot of money. I don't even know how much money, but we're going to be spending a lot, right? And so it's not necessary. The governance model changes, and the governance model becomes more about how quickly can we experiment, discover a new cost line, right? A new cost basis, and then adapt our models to it, right? And so you get this sort of wave effect of where you're like variance going away from what your forecast model is, and then how fast can we bring it in line, right? And so I think that's when I think of sort of advanced FinOps capabilities, I think that's more of the dream state for companies that have aggressive innovation goals. They want to be responsible with it, but responsibility isn't about constrained costs and slowing down people, putting in more red tape. It's about how do we actually release that energy, that innovation energy, in such a way that we can always true up our models, our forecasts, and our rules, and our, whatever constraints we have to adapt to the value that experimentation and innovation is creating.
It's just this FinOps flywheel where it took us so long to get a model in place for just the most essentials.
Right.
But now I don't have a number. I'm sure that'll be posted all over online once I look. But I'm sure, like, how many new services did AWS announce? Right?
Yeah.
I'm gonna guess it's more than my fingers and toes, right?
Yeah.
But to your point, companies at this point, you think of like digital transformation in general. It's not like, hey, we should maybe explore this in months to come. It's like, no, we should be exploring everything all the time.
Yeah.
Because as companies have gone, we're gonna, this is 5 years ago when I was in this world, right? It was let's stay away from Kubernetes because we don't know it.
Mm-hmm.
Let's not touch that because let's just do our VMs.
Yeah.
But as that has changed, go, oh, wow, like these new technologies make us faster, more competitive, be able to help our internal and external customers better.
Yeah.
There is a desire to go into the toy shop and pick up every toy and try things out. But to your point, the FinOps teams now need to get to a point where they can just quickly keep up and react. And again, technology should help support those teams do that.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, listen, this has been great, and it's always so great to be in person.
Yeah.
Glad that it's always great to be
week.
With our customers, listening to them, talking to them in this setting, with our partners, with our prospects, and learning. It's great to be in a space like a conference like this where you're getting a lot of food for thought. You're looking back, you're looking forward, and what's probably most exciting for me as a product marketer is listening to our chief product officer take all of this in. Because I know it's like, now you got to go back to the team and say, hey, here's what we learned, here's what we heard, and how do we think about where we're going?
Yeah.
I know there's been a lot of work there. We look forward, a couple months past holiday, we have our annual summit with our team coming up in January. And I think a lot of what we learned this week, a lot of what we heard, there's a lot that we can bring to that conversation.
Yeah, looking forward to it.
To our community of partners and customers.
Yeah.
So I want to thank everybody that did join us this week. This was great.
Yeah.
And I look forward to seeing what we learned and where that goes pretty soon. So thank you, Kyle. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, Will. Thanks.
Thanks, everyone.